Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In today's lecture, we are going to discuss the meaning. It means the overall discussion of this chapter, form and function analysis, language, context analysis, how a child acquiring the meaning of a word, situated meanings and cultural models or discourse models, situated meanings in and out of science, situated meanings as assemblies, a patron recognition view of the mind, the social mind, and the situated meanings as a tool of inquiry. Students, all these points we may divide them into two lectures. So half of them we would discuss in the first in seventh lecture, and half of them we would discuss the in eighth lecture. Students, the primary tools of inquiry we will discuss in this lecture are situated meanings and discourse models. I will argue that the meanings of words, when we look at them in their actual context of use, are not general. Rather, words have different specific meanings in different contexts of use. At the same time, uh, we will see that the meanings of words are also integrally linked to and vary across different social and cultural groups. Students, this lecture will also discuss a perspective on the human mind. Traditional views of the mind in cognitive psychology have tended to view the human mind as a rule following device that works in quite abstract and general ways. Students, the perspective taken here views the human mind as a pattern recognizing device that works primarily by storing experiences and finding patterns in those experiences. So students, to begin and develop a situated viewpoint on meaning, situated means grounded in actual practices and experiences. I will consider two areas where it is clear that meaning of any word or phrase is multiple and flexible, changing in different situations. The first area involves looking at how children acquire the meaning of words. The second area involves looking at how scientists and everyday people use the same words to mean different things. However, even without detailed discussion, students, it should be obvious to anyone that words take on different meanings, have different situated meanings in different contexts of use. For example, think of the different meanings that the simple word coffee takes on in these different sentences, each of which implies a different context. The coffee spilled, go and get a mop, that is a leak word. The coffee spilled, go and get a broom, that are beans or grains. The coffee spilled, stack it again, that are cans and packages. Coffee ice cream is good, that is a flavor. So students, in our subheadings, we may have a contrast of two types of analysis in which a discourse analyst can understand the things. One type of analysis does involve rather general meanings, and we start with this. This will tell us what generally does exist in regard to the meanings of words and phrases. However, the other type of analysis dealt with in in another subheading quickly moves us to meanings that are quite specific to the actual contexts in which words are used. So these subheadings also look at how children learn to contextualize the meaning of words to specific contexts and introduces the notion of cultural models or what I call discourse models. Discourse models are largely unconscious theories we hold that help us to make sense of texts and the word. The subheadings look at the different meanings one and the same word can have in everyday life and in science. Subsequent sections elaborate on the notion of situated meaning, meaning that is grounded in specific contexts of use by specific socio-cultural groups of people. Students, this lecture argue that meaning in this sense is both an active process, we partly make it up on the spot, and a social process, we are influenced by our affiliation with various sorts of social groups. Students, in regard to meaning, there are two different types of analysis in which discourse analysis can engage. One type of analysis is the study of rather general correlation between form, that is structure, and function, that is meaning in language. Students, let us call this form function analysis. This other type of analysis is the study of much more specific interactions between language and context. Let us call this language context analysis. Though the two types of analysis are related, students, we may discuss them in turn, starting with form function analysis. Students, linguists use the word form to designate structural aspect of language, things like the parts of speech, for example, nouns and verbs, types of phrases, for example, noun phrases and verb phrases, or types of clauses, for example, independent and dependent clauses. Students, they use the word function for the sorts of meanings a given form can communicate, or the sorts of interactional work, mean purposes, a given form can accomplish. Students, language is a tool used for a number of different purposes, not just one, and we may make a distinction between form and function for any tool, not just language. A hammer has a given form, its shape and material it is made out of, and that forms fits it to carry out certain functions, purposes rather well. For example, hammering, pounding, removing nails, and other functions not so well. For example, raking ground or opening cans. Student specific structures or forms in a language are used as tools to carry out certain functions, that is to express certain meanings or accomplish certain purposes. For example, consider sentence. Though they were both narrowly confined to the privileged classes, the Whig and Tory parties represented different factions. Students, these two parties are the famous parties of England, Whigs and Tories. Students, to make matters a bit clearer, here we may on first mention bold all technical terms that name either forms or functions. Those that name forms we may leave in lowercase, and we may capitalize those that name functions. The sentence in 1 is made up of two clauses: an independent or main clause. The Whig and Tory parties represented different factions, and a dependent clause, though they were both narrowly confined to the privileged classes. The conjunctions, though, here marks this clause as subordinated to, dependent on, the following independent clause. These are statements about form. An independent clause has as one of its functions that it expresses an assertion, that is, it expresses a claim that the speaker writer is making. Students, a dependent clause here has as one of its functions that it expresses information that is not asserted but rather assumed or taken for granted. These are statements about functions or meanings. So normally in English, dependent clauses follow independent clauses. Thus sentence 1 above might more normally appear as the Whig and Tory parties represented different factions, though they were both narrowly confined to the privileged classes. In this sentence, the dependent clause here, the dependent clause has been fronted, placed in front of the whole sentence. That is a statement about form. Such fronting has as one of its functions that the information is the clause is thematized. That is, the information is treated as a launching off point or thematically important context from which to consider the claim in the following dependent clause. This is a statement about function. To sum up, in respect to form, functioning, mapping, we can say that the sentence in 1 renders its dependent clause, though they were both narrowly confined to the privileged classes, are taken for granted, assumed, unargued for, though important context from which to consider and perhaps argue over the main claim in the independent clause. That is, the Whig and Tory parties represented different factions. The dependent clause is, we might say, a concession. Other historians might prefer to make this concession the main asserted point and thus would use a different grammar. Students, what we have talked about so far, generally correlation between form and function is sometimes called utterance type meaning. That is, there are certain types of forms in a language like English, for example, independent and dependent clauses, subjects and objects of sentences, nouns and verbs, and they are associated with certain types of functions or meanings, what I called meaning potentials above. However, when we actually utter or write a sentence, it also has what has sometimes been called an utterance taken meaning, or what we may here call situated meaning. Situated meanings arise because particular language forms take on specific or situated meanings in specific contexts. Students, the word context here refers to an ever widening set of factors that accompany language in use. These include the material setting, the people present and what they know and believe, the language that comes before and after a given utterance, the social relationship of the people involved, and their ethnic, gendered, and sexual identities, as well as cultural, historical, and institutional factors. Most contemporary approaches to discourse analysis assume a reflexive view of the relationship between language and context. Reflexive here means that at one and the same time an utterance influences what we take the context to be, and context influences what we take the utterance to mean. For example, a form like how question reduced form how are ya, how question reduced form of you, combination of are and ya, tends to signal a context which is informal and where the interlocutors are of fairly equal status. At the same time, we use such words and they have thus the power of signaling this sort of context because we take ourselves to be in such a context. So students, words and context mutually interact over time. So let us learn to an example of utterance type meaning, meaning potential, as against utterance token meaning, situated meaning. The word coffee is an arbitrary form. Other language use different sounding words for coffee that correlates with meanings having to do with the substance coffee, that is its meaning potential. At a more specific level, we have to use context to determine what the word means in any situated way. In one context, coffee means a brown liquid. In another one, it means grains of a certain sort. In another, it means berries of a certain sort, and it means other things in other contexts. For example, a certain flavor. So students, to see a further example of potential versus situated meanings, this time not at the level of a single word like coffee, but at the level of the sentence. Consider sentence 1 again. Though they were both narrowly confined to the privileged classes, the Whig and Tory parties represented different factions. We said above that an independent clause represents an assertion, a claim that something is true. But this general form, function, correlation can mean different things at a specific level in actual contexts of use, and can indeed even be mitigated or undercut together. Students, assertion is just a way to capture the general meaning or meaning potential or meaning range of the form independent clause. Such clauses take on different specific meanings within this potential or range in specific contexts. For example, in one context, say between two like-minded historians, the claim that the Whig and Tory parties represented different factions may just be taken as a reminder of a fact they both agree on. On the other hand, between two quite diverse historians, the same claim may be taken as a challenge despite your claim that shared class interests mean no real difference in political parties. The Whig and Tory parties in 17th century England were really different. And of course, students, on stage as part of a drama, The claim about the Whig and Tory parties is not even a real assertion but a pretend one. Furthermore, the words privileged, contending, and factions will take on different specific meanings in different contexts. For example, in one context, privileged might mean rich, while in another context, it might mean educated or cultured or politically connected or born into a family with high status or some combination of the above.